you all do not talk to each other, don't touch each other.
Welcome everyone to our Little House on the Prairie presentation. Hello to all you Facebook Live people watching us. Welcome. Today we're going to see a really cool program. How many of you have read any of the Little House on the Prairie books? All right. Well, my friend Kay Little is an expert on the subject. She has worn period costume, brought a lot of artifacts from that time period. She's going to really have a fun and educational program for us. Again, Kay Little from Little History Adventures. She does lots of programming like this for groups, and she's also known as Miss Laura's fourth grade teacher. She was my fourth grade teacher when she was fresh out of college, and here we are. Isn't that crazy?
Now I'm working for her.
Yeah. So let's give Kay Little a big hand, and her assistant Olivia, and her roadie. Where is he? Caleb somewhere. What? There you are. For helping with all the setup and everything.
I know. I couldn't do it without my grandkids.
Yeah.
Yes, I have. Olivia here is dressed much like Laura and her sisters would have been dressed during the writing of the Little House on the Prairie books. I am dressed more like Laura would have been as a young adult, even though I'm not a young adult. Yeah, so anyway, I'll have her come back and help me towards the end. I'm going to tell you a little bit of history about Laura and her family and how she got started writing, and it's really cool when you read her story. But Laura was born in February of 1867 in Pepin, Wisconsin, to Charles and Caroline Ingalls. She was their second child. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Those of you that know their story know that Mary was the firstborn. Laura's first memories of her family, well, her first memories, period, are of her father as being strong, fearless, and jolly. He was a lot of fun. And her mom was gentle and quiet and comforting. So she has really good first memories of her parents. There was a lot of music in the home. You know, Pa played his fiddle. I really thought about even bringing a CD player and playing you some music, but I bet you the library might have some, or you can find it online. But Pa was always playing music, and they were always singing, whether it was hymns or just folk songs, but there was always music. Pa was also a hunter, and here's a hat that maybe he would have worn like this. He had a powder horn that he would put the gunpowder in and carry it with him as he would go hunt. And the reason why he would hunt is for food and for fur skins. And I have a few fur skins. When this is all over, I'm going to let you come up and touch them. That sound like fun? Yeah. So that was one way he was able to provide for his family. He did have a restless spirit, though. He could not stay in one place at one time, or for very long, rather. And this is why we have all these books, because we have all these adventures that Laura wrote about all their different moves. They first lived in Wisconsin, and then Pa wanted open prairie. Just too many people coming in, and it was a problem. Yeah. Now, it might not be that way, maybe for some of us, but he had heard about this open prairie in Kansas with 160 acres free. So he decided to move the family from Wisconsin to Kansas in 1869, shortly after the Civil War was over. He had heard that the Osage Indians were moving out of the area, so it was going to be open for the white people. So they rode in a covered wagon, much as I have here, but of course huge. It would be the size of a big part of this park. They rode in this covered wagon all day, every day, until they got to where they were going in Kansas. They settled on Osage land, like I said, because they were told they were going to move. So Pa found logs, some trees to make logs to build a cabin, and they were close to a river. Now, just so you know, I'm going to tell you in a minute. Never mind. He also dug a well. And the location this is what I was going to tell you. The location is about 45 minutes from here of when they lived in Kansas, just right outside of Independence, Kansas. Have any of you been to the Little House on the Prairie in Kansas? Very good. Isn't it fun? Because they built a replica cabin now. If you were there like a little over a year ago, they were still building it, but rebuilding another one. But it's built now. Also, the hand-dug well that Paul built, when you read about it in Little House on the Prairie, it is there. They've cemented it in, though, so you can't fall in, but you can see where it was. And there was a river close by, which means trees. So he was able to find trees to build his cabin. Now, in real life, baby Carrie was born in Kansas. Laura didn't always remember all of her early facts, right? Because, she was only like 2 or 3. And so in her mind, Carrie came with them on the covered wagon because she didn't totally remember. But she was born shortly after they came to Kansas. So, let's see. So where they lived in Kansas, Osage Indians lived all around there. Okay, a lot of those Indians would walk right past the cabin. They would even come up to the front door and knock on the door and ask for food. Well, this scared Mom. She had heard too many stories about Indians out in Colorado area, killing and scalping the white people, and she was always afraid that was going to happen. So when you read thoughts in the books, just know she was doing that out of fear. They would not, and they did not scalp and kill them. They just wanted to see these white people, what they were doing. And they knew they were getting ready to move to Indian Territory, which, by the way, the Osage, when they were in Kansas, they left Kansas to come here to Bartlesville, a lot of them. And they settled on Silver Lake. And then found out that wasn't where they were supposed to go, and so they ended up in Pawhuska, and I'm getting off task, sorry. Okay, so after a year and a half, they decided to move back to Wisconsin. There were several reasons. One of them was because Mom was a little scared, was too scared of the Indians. If only they had stayed just a couple more years, the Indians would have been gone. So they moved back to Wisconsin. Then in 1874, they moved to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. And in 1875, son Charles was born, Charles Frederick, but he died the next year. And then the family moved to Burr Oak, Iowa to run a hotel. And in 1877, Grace was born. She was born there in Iowa. The next year, the family moved back to Walnut Grove. So you see how they kept moving back and forth because Paul just was really restless. And I admire Caroline going along with that and not, she didn't seem to complain really. So that's pretty cool. But like I said, it made for really interesting stories. Well, Mary went to school at age 6. Well, Laura was 4. And she was jealous. She really wanted to go to school. She wanted to learn how to read. So when Mary would come home from school, she would teach Laura how to read. And reading was very important in the family. In fact, Mom and Pa would read every night to the girls, encourage the girls to read. And so Laura grew up. That's what you did. You read all the time. And so then when they moved back to Walnut Grove, the community built a school and a church, and they helped do that. When the students went to school, they brought their own books from home. And I'm going to show you some of that stuff when we're finished.
Could I hook you up? Because we've got people in the back now that probably can't hear. I'm sorry, guys. We've got enough people here now, and we're social distancing, so
we're being flexible.
For those in the back, we're improvising a little and adding.
Okay, how do we do?
First, I turn it down.
Okay, there's a speaker right here, and where's the other one?
Oh, I thought we tested this out. Check.
Maybe because we moved our stuff.
possibly. Check. Check.
Okay, how do we do this?
Hang on.
Okay.
Come over here.
Okay.
Hold that.
Hold this.
Hold that.
Okay.
We're gonna do-
Oh, that, okay. Oh, my card's on. Kayla, can you help her?
Yep. It's okay. It's okay. Say test.
Testing. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear her in the back?
Can you hear in the back? Okay.
Okay. Now
So,
you,
we're going to figure out how to put this on. It goes over
years ago.
this.
Well,
Wait, where does
it
this
goes
go?
over your head and behind. Yeah. So I don't know.
How do people do this?
I don't know.
That doesn't feel. Is that right? Where's the microphone? Okay. Can you hear me?
Is it coming through the speaker?
Is it? Okay. Because it didn't quite sound like it was. Okay.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
You guys are troopers. You're a good audience. Okay. So the family went to this new church, the Congregational Church, and as they watched it being built, it helped also. They love singing hymns and reading Bible verses. You know, I told you how the family all reads a lot, or read a lot, and one of the books that was the most important book to read was the Bible. And faith in God was very important to Laura and her family. And they also loved the home that Paul had built. She really loved that new home. Laura was a great student. She was the best speller in the school. She was also a hard worker. In fact, people started finding out that Laura was a really good worker, even as a very young girl, about the age of some of you here. And so they would hire her to run errands for them. Ooh, the wind's gonna. They would hire her to run errands for them to help with maybe a sick family member, and all while she's probably about 11 years old. At age 11, she was helping a friend, take care of a sick family member. And as she's at their place helping them out, she really felt God's presence when she was lonely and homesick. Because she loved being with her family, but she also was willing to help her friends. She said that experience that she felt from God went with her all the way through her life and helped her in everything she did. So scripture and faith were interwoven in all of her books. When you read her books, you can tell that. She grew up, like we said earlier, hearing her pa play the fiddle. He would play hymns on the fiddle. And when they lived too far from a church, they would have church at home. They would respect the Sabbath and have church at home. Now, one thing that meant was the kids could not play very much around the house on Sabbath. So that's why I will show you one thing I have. They would have very quiet toys. So this is a doll that the girls would have that wouldn't make any noise, even if it fell. So, oh, okay. Even after Laura and Almanzo got married, church and faith was very important to them. Now you notice I said Almanzo. I just found out recently that's really how you pronounce his name. We all heard it Almanzo on the TV series. TV series wasn't always true to the books. So I find myself going back and forth. But after Laura died, family members found some really cool things in her Bible. They found this page where she had written out things to do, like if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling depressed, if you're doing this, read this scripture. And so a couple of them are, she said, in facing a crisis, read Psalm 46. To live successfully with others, read Romans chapter 12. And we could really use that one right now. There are a whole lot of others. There's a whole page of them. Well, shortly after Laura turned 12, Mary became blind. How many of you knew that? That Sister Mary, yes. So Laura became Mary's eyes. And one really neat thing about it is Mary told Laura, she said, you make pictures when you talk. She loved to have Laura talk to her. and tell her what all was going on. When Laura was 13, living in DeSmet, she met the Wilder brothers, Almanzo and Royal, and also their sister Eliza Jane. Paul became friends with the Wilder boys and really liked them, and thought they were really neat boys, good boys, good workers. And he was especially impressed with Almanzo. So Eliza Jane was also the teacher for a while there. But you know what? The students didn't like her. They thought she was mean and didn't think she was really a good teacher. So Laura was conflicted because she really didn't care for Eliza Jane. Now, on the TV series, she loved her. It was different. Anyway, during that time, Laura started writing poems. So we're going to see a progression of her writing. A school district 12 miles south of DeSmet asked almost 16-year-old Laura. Now, think about 16. I don't think we have any 16-year-olds here, do we? We have maybe some 13-year-olds, but just think about being 16 and being asked to teach in a small school. So this small school, several miles away from where Laura and her family lived, found out what a good worker Laura was and what a smart student she was. So they made an exception for her and let her pass her teaching test. And she became a teacher and wasn't quite 16 yet. And she also had to leave home and live in this town. And she lived with the family of one of the students. Well, the mother in the family was not very nice. She did not seem to like Laura. Laura was miserable. It was only for 8 weeks just to finish out the school term. And so Laura could not wait every morning to go to school to get away from her. But she was already dreading that first weekend because she didn't want to have to stay with them. Guess what? On Friday afternoon, Almanzo, 26-year-old Almanzo, shows up to get her to take her back home. Well, she's excited to go home, but she's a little confused about why he's coming to get her. So he did that for every week, and then took her back. At the end of the 8 weeks, he came, picked her up, and took her back home. Well, every Friday after she moved back home, he still showed up to take her for rides. And so she was a little surprised at first and wondered what all this was about. Well, it wasn't long before they were dating. And then it wasn't long before they got married. She was 18. Almanzo was 28. So Laura called him Manly. She didn't really like his name, so she called him Manly. He didn't really care for her name, so he called her Bessie. Her middle name was Elizabeth. So they called each other those names. And like I said, they were married when she was 18, he was 21. Now they eloped. You know what that means? To elope? They didn't have a big church wedding. They went away and got married without anybody being with them because Eliza Jane was going to have this big wedding and plan the wedding, which means she was basically going to control it, and they didn't want her to control it. Well, they settled down a few miles from where her folks lived. She loved her new home. She loved being a wife. And then within a year or two, they had a little girl named Rose, and she loved being a mother. Later, they had a son, but he died before they. We kind of see not a tradition, something going on there where mom had a son that died, she had a son that died. Well, Laura and Almanzo moved to his family's place in Minnesota for a while, but he needed a warmer climate. He had had some sicknesses that caused him to need a warmer climate. So they decided to move to Florida. Well, they didn't like Florida. So they moved back to where his folks were. And then but he knew he needed a warmer climate. So that's when they decided to move to Mansfield, Missouri. In 1894, they purchased the Rocky Ridge Farm, and they loved it there. And that's where they lived until they died. And Laura always helped Almanzo. She did just as much work as any man would do. And as Rose became older, she did too. Well, like her mother, Rose loved to read and write, and she would go over to her neighbor's house and read all the books in her neighbor's library. Well, Laura became very successful as a poultry raiser, was asked to speak to groups telling how to raise chickens, and how she became so successful. So at one of the meetings, the editor of a farm weekly was very impressed with her writing style and asked her to write articles for his magazine. She was excited. She loved writing, so she decided she would do that. She, like I said, she always loved reading and writing. She became known as an expert on farm life. Started writing articles for other magazines. Rose was writing articles for other kinds of magazines, and so they would exchange ideas to help each other. Laura loved living in the country, but she also knew how to live in the city. So she would help a lot of the country women know how to shop in the city. Didn't want them to not know what to do and become embarrassed. So she would help them out. She really enjoyed being able to help them. Almanzo was very popular. He was described as witty and joyful, full of stories. He gave great advice about horses, farming, and politics. They were definitely a great couple for the community and a good fit. Well, Laura and Almanzo installed a phone into their home. They were one of the few that had a phone. Rose became so successful that she bought her parents a car. And then she had another home built on their property. But you know what? Laura and Almanzo, see, I keep going back and forth. They didn't like the new house. They liked the old farmhouse, and so they eventually moved back to the old farmhouse. They did have electricity put into both of them, but Rose was always trying to get them to not work so hard. That was her reason for that. But they loved working hard. Laura wrote because she wanted children to understand more about the beginnings of history, of life in the country. Um, she wanted them to know how frontier life was, like it was for her. She had seen the whole frontier during her lifetime, the woods, the Indian country, railroads, homesteading, and farmers, and she wanted children to know all about that. So in 1930, she started writing her autobiography. She was a little sad that the frontier had actually vanished. Like I said, she wanted children to know about it. She wanted adults to even know about it who maybe didn't live through that time. So she started writing about her experiences as a little girl all the way through her marriage to family. And she entitled it Pioneer Girl. Well, Harper and Brothers wanted to publish it, but not all at once. So they asked her to break it up into stories, and that's how we get the books. So, Little House in the Big Woods was the first book in 1932. It became very popular. She became famous, and she was 65 years old. And I'm almost 68, so she was close to my age when she started really writing a lot and becoming famous. Her writings caused children to want to start writing, and they wanted more books. Next was Farmer Boy, which was about Almanzo's childhood. And she wrote her stories. I have to show you. She had these tablets that she wrote on. Have any of you have ever seen these big cheap tablet books? Some of you adults probably had them in school. Well, she wrote her stories on these. So I was excited when I found that at a store recently. Her writing on them. So she wrote her stories in pencil. Rose would type them and send them to the editor. The next book was Little House on the Prairie, the one that I told you about, was written about their time in Kansas, just up the road from here. Now, in that book, Laura tells a story about a black doctor named Doc Tan. Do any of you remember reading about that when you read the book, Little House on the Prairie? He saved the family from a deadly disease, and he just lived down the road from them. But guess what? A few years later, he moved to Bartlesville. Did you know that? Isn't that cool? He actually had an office in Mr. Bartle's store just down on the Caney River. And then eventually had a hospital out off of Tuxedo. You know where the baseball fields are on Tuxedo? Back behind there, he had a hospital. Yeah, I think that's really cool. So, and he ended up moving back to Kansas, and he died there, and he's buried in the Independence Cemetery. Laura wanted her stories to be true stories with historically accurate details. Like, she did have a great memory, but there are a few little sketchy memories just because she was so young. I mean, most people do not remember details about their life when they're 2 and 3 years old, but they're pretty much accurate. Um, and so we know that most of the things that we've read in these books really happened. She wrote several more books: On the Banks of Plum Creek, By Shores of Silver Lake, The Long Winter, Little Town, Little Town on the Prairie, and these 7 books became known as the Little House books. She did go on to write These Happy Golden Years and The First 4 Years, about her courtship and dating and marriage, early marriage to Almanzo. In 1937, 70-year-old Laura and 80-year-old Almanzo traveled to a book fair in Detroit, Michigan, from Missouri, where large crowds came to see her. She was so popular. Just think, she's 70 years old. They came to see her and to hear all about her experiences. Also, Laura's books helped students in South Dakota become interested in their state history. You know, where she lived, South Dakota. And one kid even said, "I never knew South Dakota had such interesting history." People kept begging Laura to write more, but she just wanted to enjoy life. But you know what? Even though she didn't keep writing more books, she did keep writing in her tablets. She couldn't not write. Excuse me. After World War II, Laura's books were translated into German and Japanese. The U.S. State Department wanted those countries to see what pioneer life was like here. They became very popular. Children all over the world loved Laura, and they voted her their favorite author. When she was 80, a store in Chicago held a birthday party for her. But Almanzo was not feeling well, and she didn't want to leave him. So she didn't want to disappoint these kids either. So she sent 200 autographs and a letter to be read to the children. And here's what she wrote in her letter. The Little House books are stories of long ago. The way we live in your schools are much different now. So many changes have been made, have made living and learning easier. Sorry.
We don't care if you need to take a break and drink some water.
Well, I need to get a coffee. So, here's what I need. But the real things haven't changed, she said. It's still best to be honest and truthful, to make the most of what we have, to be happy with simple pleasures, and to be cheerful and have courage when things go wrong. I think that's pretty good advice. In December of 1948, Detroit opened a new library and named it for Laura. Well, this was the first library to be named for a living person and for a woman. So that was a pretty high honor. And soon there were more libraries named for her, including the one that she helped build in Mansfield. She was 84 years old now. American Library Association created a Laura Ingalls Wilder award in 1954, and she was turning 87. This was a medal given to authors who had written very important books for children. She was excited and honored. And that same year, when she's 87, she rode in an airplane for the first time. So she thought that was really cool. She was always up for new adventures. Well, toward the end of her life, she was heard to say, "It seems impossible to me that I have seen so many changes in living." So when she was 89, she became ill and went to the hospital. And kids got together in the community. They got this big old 12-foot scroll of paper, wrote all these messages to her saying, please get well. We can't wait to see you again. And one boy even said he'd rather read her books than watch TV. I think that's a pretty high compliment. Well, all of this did cheer her up, and she was able to leave the hospital. But on February 10th, 1957, 3 days after her 90th birthday, she died, and people all over the world mourned her death. They were sad to see her go. She lived a very full life and accomplished so many awesome things. Imagine you writing your story. What would it be like? What would you include in your story? So I want you to think about that. Maybe go home this afternoon and start writing about your life. Okay, that's what I have about Laura. I do have a lot of artifacts that I was going to tell you a little bit about. How are we doing on time?
We're good.
Okay. Well, you notice I do have a covered wagon that looks a lot like what they would have had. In one of her stories, she talks about churning butter, and I have a butter churner here. I tried to pick out things that I remembered reading in some of the books. They read by candlelight. I have a couple of different lamps. A kerosene lamp that I broke the glass globe on, but that would have been one of them. When the kids went, I talked about how they went to school and they had to bring their own books from home. They usually also had bought their own slate boards and had their slate pencils, later chalk. They would bring their lunch to school in a little lunch bucket. They probably would be a little bigger than this, but I have them in several different sizes. But lunch would just consist of whatever was probably left over from dinner the night before. The McGuffey Readers was a very popular reader. I'm not sure if Laura actually read from it or there was a different series too at the same time. Very similar. But I have several old school books to represent some of the books they might have taken to school and a reprint of a McGuffey. The Bible was very important, and I have a Bible here. One reason why the Bible was very important, not only because it's the Word of God, but like Laura, she would write down these scriptures and for different things in her life. And also, it was a good place to write down every family member's name, when they were born, when they got married, when they were baptized, when they died. And so you have a good family history in your Bible. Yeah, do you remember, those of you that have read the books, that everywhere they went, Ma would make sure the shepherdess was put on the shelf. And I just happen to have one here. I love this. One of the books talks about a spider skillet. I just happen to have one of those. That you can see why it's called that. That way it's not directly on the fire. Okay, and also when they're traveling, they had to eat hardtack sometimes. Does anybody know what hardtack is? When you study about the war, especially Revolutionary and Civil War, the soldiers would all have hardtack, and it's these hard crackers. I mean, this is several years old. I could probably dip it in something wet and eat it, but I'm not gonna. And I have some dishes to show, some of them that they might have had. The forks even look a little different. See that? I have a wash tub with a washboard, because this is how they would wash their clothes. And then they would have lye soap that Ma would have made from animal fat and some other things. And so that's how they would wash their clothes. And of course, they all had their little bonnets. The bonnets, as you can see, would have a little place on the back to keep their back of their neck from being too hot. And then the thing in the front would keep the sun from their face. In one of the books, Laura gets a new doll named Caroline. She names her Caroline. And this is a replica of that. And of course, all the dolls are homemade. I have another one. You know, did I show you the handkerchief doll? A Sunday doll. Um, oh, the iron at the time was very heavy. So I'm going to let you come up and look and touch the stuff in a minute, but I would ask that you not pick up the iron because it's very heavy and it could hurt somebody. I have a coffee grinder that you put the coffee in and grind it and then cook it in the coffee pot, drink it. Their clothes were calico. I have some like this, like Olivia's dress, like my blouse, and Ma would make all the clothes. And a lot of times she might make Pa and the boys' shirts out of some of the same fabric. Like they might have a purple handkerchief or purple shirt, whatever. Um, let's see. Oh, you know, back then, they back in the early days in the pioneer times, they would not have had electricity or running water. So, you know, we have the candle lamps. They would have to go to the creek to get the water, to wash their clothes, to wash their dishes, to drink water, to cook with a little bit. But think about going to the bathroom. You don't have toilets in your house. And so what they would have a lot of times under their beds are chamber pots. This is how you would go to the bathroom. And then in the morning, you would have to go dump it out. And they might have an outhouse out back, so they would go dump it out in the outhouse. They'd find a place, whatever. Are there any questions about anything up here? I forgot to have my lovely assistant help me. No. Any questions? Also, I want to make sure if you haven't read all the books, the library has these books. So Miss Laura Jo can help you find all those. And I highly recommend you reading the whole series. Yes, ma'am. This one?
Her dog looks like that dog.
The dog?
The dog.
Oh.
Did you say dog or dog? Dog. Dog, sorry.
That's okay.
She has a dog.
Yeah, cool. Anybody else have a question?
I will ask that when you come to look at the artifacts, if each family group would come one at a time.
Yeah.
So I'll
That's
let
a
you
good
guys
idea.
fight that out amongst yourselves. Maybe start with the people in the back that haven't figured it out.
Yeah.
You go first to look at the artifacts. Whoever gets to go first.
Yeah.
Okay. Someone else? Let's give Caleb a big hand and thank you for Thank you so much.
Thank you. I love sharing the history.
Yeah.
So.
If you're interested in her doing, what else do you do?
Oh, I have. Where are my business
Yeah,
cards?
she's got
They're back there. Okay. I have a list of different programs I can do. Some of them are about Bartlesville, different aspects of Bartlesville history, Oklahoma history, some U.S. Oh, I have a YouTube channel.
What?
Caleb is helping me with it. I can't tell you what it's called, but
Little History Adventures.
it is called Little History Adventures. I have a Little History Adventures Facebook page, and we're putting some of those videos on there and telling you how to go to YouTube.
Okay.
So I'm still learning all that, but my awesome assistant here knows all that. So.
Big brain.
But I'll speak to all ages. Okay.